Hello and welcome to the Athletic Soccer Show. This is your post-game review at the World Cup. My name is Jack Collins, and today talking about the third place game we've just seen where Croatia have beaten Morocco. I'm joined by the one, the only, the wonderful Mr. Carl Anka. How you doing, mate?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the lovely intro. How you getting on?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. It feels like, we're coming to the end of what has been an on-pitch phenomenal tournament. We've seen a lot of really, really interesting games. I think it's been a tournament generally that's thrown so much up, and coming to the end of it now, it's like, okay, we've done a really good month, but I feel like the end is upon us.
Yeah, it's definitely been one of high drama and high chaos. It's felt like a big sugar rush of a tournament,
Yeah.
and I think today was good evidence of what happens as you get to the end of the sugar rush and going, okay, well, I need to get some vegetables in. I need to calm down just a little bit.
No, I think that's it. That's it. We're getting to these games, and also, look, we talk about this game. We talk about third place games in general. I think because there was a little bit of skepticism, I'll say, on the timeline over whether these games are kind of worth their salt. There is no obviously podium in World Cups. You don't get three people stood on a three place like an Olympic podium. At the end of it, the bronze medal doesn't mean all that much. But I think generally third place games, Carla, are really, really good entertainment. And we saw that again today. And in 2018, probably the exception to the rule, England and Belgium played out, a relatively dull affair. But you look back through the third place games, obviously there was that Netherlands 3-0 victory over Brazil, which was the kind of
Hilarious. Hilarious.
hangover the 7-1, right? 10 goals conceded in 2 games. You go back to 2010, and there was that absolute stunner of a game between Germany and Uruguay, which ended 3-2. These games are usually worth their salt in the fact that there's kind of handbrake off in so many ways. And they're like, well, there's nothing really to lose here. Third and fourth is much of a muchness. We may as well have a go. And I think we've seen that again today.
Yeah, definitely. This was the most effervescent I've seen in Morocco's attack. They weren't pressing or indeed counter pressing in the way you've seen them play throughout this tournament. But some of the connections between Ziyech and Hakimi were quite thrilling. Ziyech was playing closer to his Ajax iteration while doing a couple of those. I'm having a go from long range here, which is fun. And yeah, I suppose it's the thing of in international football, having fun and being successful aren't always the same thing.
Yeah.
And that is one of the joys of the third place playoff. It's not a game that I'd say is essential viewing, but when you do tune in to watch it, it's more entertaining than not. It's somewhere, but I take it more seriously than every single preseason game, and probably slightly more seriously than I would a Nations League game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's a nice place to put it. It's one of those, though, and you kind of touched on it there. This is the Morocco that I think we're going to see during qualifiers at AFCON, where they are, the team in the ascendancy. And we've seen so much of this tournament where they've been great to watch in terms of their counter-attacking style, in terms of that pressing, as you mentioned. But actually, it has been mostly backs to the wall, don't concede, get through it, and hit them where we know we can. But today it felt like they'd opened up. And I think that you could say the same for Croatia, who have been, right, we're going to grind out results throughout this tournament. And today they were like, just let Mislav Orsic off the leash. I think he's shot about 6 times. You're looking at these and going, well, we're just going to see what happens. Perisic is playing left back. We're not really playing with a defensive line in many ways. And it led to a very end-to-end encounter, one of those basketball games at times.
Yeah. Central midfield became more of a concept rather than a central theme. What did you make of Perisic playing left back? Because I was a bit like, oh, should we let him get that extra walk-up goal?
Well, I think this is the thing, right? It was interesting because, and then they spoke about it a lot in the commentary. If Croatia had been given the penalty that should have been a penalty, then would he have taken it? Would Modric in his last World Cup game have handed the ball to his old mate and gone, you know what, go and have that record? And I think that in itself would have been a really nice moment of Modric being like, I'm the guy. I'm the selfless player of a generation, and I don't even need to score the goal for the headlines to be about me. But yeah, I think he would have been a little bit put back by the fact that he was playing left back. But I imagine Zlatko Dalic would have said to him, you're playing left back, go and have a go, mate. And he was relatively high up the pitch for the majority of it.
Yeah, I call that the James Milner left back. If you remember that one season where Milner was left back for Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp, and he said, I believe he went to Klopp, I don't think we'll get on the ball too much, and Klopp went, trust me, just trust me. That was Perisic, and Perisic is one of the great performers of international football. He was again just phenomenal, getting up and down that left hand side. Croatia's tactics were quite interesting to me in that they basically. Well, this game was really interesting in that both teams tried to use a rudimentary method you see a lot in Champions League games. So for Croatia, it was very much, let's just chuck 5 people on the last line of defense, and we've got Luka Modric behind them, and he'll just find a way to fire it into them. So overload and fire. Whereas Carl and Carpenter on Twitter, excellent football analyst, broke down Morocco's system, which is the fullback pressing up, the number 8 drifting wide, and the winger inverting. So that meant there was always that triangle of rotation, which is very Real Madrid inspired. So they're both doing a club tactic you've seen before, but also because it's a third place playoff, both of these teams are relatively knackered. They've also rotated their team a little bit to give chances for everyone else. So all the passes were going a bit astray. It felt like a really high-end, closed-door Champions League game.
Yeah, I think it's a nice way to put it. And I think that was interesting. You know, we've seen Brozovic anchor this Croatian midfield for the entire thing, and they were like, right, we're just going to play quarterback in there today. We're going to let Modric sit deepest and just fire projectiles over the top for us to try and get at. And you know what? It worked in many ways. And I think Croatia probably should have won this by more. In the end, I thought they were the side that created more. And it did feel like they should have put a couple away. And Mislav Orsic was guilty at times of just being like, I'm just going to shoot. There's 3 players around him in better positions. But I think, look, we'll come to these two teams because ultimately the kind of result doesn't hugely matter. The performance is fine. The 2 goals were worth talking about, were excellent, both from Croatia. And the set piece routine for the first is majestic. The ball doesn't touch the floor, and I think that's the mark, isn't it? The ball doesn't hit the deck.
Oh, it's wonderful when you have those lovely choreographed moves like that. And I'm sort of questioning, when did they have time to plan that? Right? Because if you've got that in your locker, that means I'm assuming you would have planned that before you come into the tournament, and then you've gone, well, actually, not quite the time. Let's not do this. Let's just swing it back post. We've got a couple of big lads. Boom, 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 boom. So, at what point do you go in between your semi-finals and then realize you're in the third place game? You go, should we just have a go, like project number 5? May as well. Yeah, remarkable set piece routine.
It's one of those where you go, will they ever use that again? Probably not. It's a one and done, isn't it? I think these are the things. Sometimes you see these goals, and you see them in the Premier League occasionally. You see them in the Championship quite a lot, I think, and across Europe as well. But generally, you see them once, and then you're like, that was a really good move. No one's ever trying it again. Once it's been done, you have to kind of take it off the roster. It was like, that one's finished. Sorry, it was strike that one out. And Morocco equalised from a slightly lucky deflection and some incredibly bad marking at a set piece. But Orsic gives Croatia back the lead. This is perfect. And I love this because it's such an Orsic goal. It's the moment he left his foot, I was like, I think he's trying to clip that off the post. And it comes off the post. And I'm like, oh, he's done it. He's absolutely nailed it. But it's spot on. And that is the moment you're going, maybe Orsic could have played more, because I think he's a wonderful footballer. But equally, where do you fit him in with Ivan Perisic and the midfield? It can't really be broken up. It's a really interesting dynamic. But I think he continues to stake his claim for a kind of starting spot going forward. And when it gets to 2024, you'd imagine that Orsic is going to be a kind of centre point of this team.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. I think he will be given the keys to go into that midfield soon. I was talking to another journalist and thinking about the non-COVID timeline that Orsic could have popped into.
Yeah.
So something I think about a lot is, obviously there was a 2-3 year spell where quite a few European clubs didn't have the money to buy players. So some players maybe stayed a year or 2 longer. Yuri Tielemans, Ruben Neves. These are players I would have expected to be in Champions League clubs if COVID hadn't happened, and here they are. And also, it really strikes me as someone who would have been in a bigger club by now if it had not been for the pandemic and the effect of that on club finances. He in the nicest way, and that sort of goal strikes me as the sort of thing that West Ham would spend a lot of money trying to acquire.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? There are a very certain select few clubs. Yeah, West Ham being one of them. I can imagine Everton being like, we could maybe do with him, and just that might be useful for us. But it does feel like that kind of player. I want to talk before we close this off just about these two nations and where they've been at this World Cup, but also where they now stand within the pantheon, if you will. And Morocco now go into an AFCON, and they are the not top ranked, but very much I think the top achieving nation from CAF at this tournament. And they will then go in as a target to be got at. But, as we kind of touched on at the start, it's going to be a very different Morocco, I think, when we see them play at AFCON to what we've seen up to this point of the World Cup. And where does that leave them going in there? Because they were good at AFCON this year. They got knocked out, obviously, by Cameroon. And it felt like they were the most exciting team to watch at the tournament until that point. They now go in, I suppose, with a little bit of a target on their back, but also a point to prove. Where does that leave them, especially considering that Waleed Regragui's only actually been in charge for 4 months?
I think it's a really precarious position. So AFCON is always a movable feast. It is currently scheduled to be in January 2024 in Ivory Coast, but that's, I think, the third time we've discussed where AFCON's going to be. So the last time we had AFCON in January this year, I was writing very much under the proviso that I thought was going to happen next summer in Ivory Coast, and they moved that again. And very often, one of the worst places you can be going into an AFCON is being dubbed the favourites, because everyone redoes their plans based on playing you. And I think, like you said, and like we talked about at the start, Morocco won't play this style of football. The style of football you saw at the World Cup during AFCON. You can't sit back in your tight 4-1-4-1 and only play 30% at AFCON, because other teams want to do that to you.
Yeah.
So you will see more of Hakimi get onto the ball. I think this right-sided connection of Hakimi, Unahi, and Hakim Ziyech will be really, really important in possession for Morocco if they want to make it, if they try and make that deep run. I think the defensive qualities will still be there. And I think you'll probably see an improvement in their counter-pressing. So the really impressive thing about this Morocco team is how they win the ball back. And what will likely happen is, likely, if everything continues on an upward trajectory, which isn't always guaranteed in football, is Morocco will improve their decisions in the final third, because I thought one reason why they perhaps didn't win this third place game was El Nesri, and the balls into El Nesri weren't of the quality that Regragui would probably want. So that will be the likely upward trajectory for Morocco, although, as I always say, AFCON doesn't care who you are, and being a favourite AFCON is often to your detriment. So I thoroughly expect to be here in early 2024 going, how have Morocco been knocked out at the quarterfinal stage playing like a stodgy 1-0 draw against Tunisia? Because that's just what happens at AFCON.
Yeah. I think that's completely fair enough. I mean, it's gonna take a little bit of rethinking, and qualifiers very similar, I'd imagine. Obviously not with the caveat of being like anything can happen here, but qualifiers are not pretty in the best times. I think obviously CAF's change of qualification ahead of the next World Cup cycle is going to be interesting, and it's been, I think, the most cutthroat of all the qualification competitions up to this point. The 10 group winners just facing each other in a non-seeded playoff is maybe the maddest thing of all time ever. But where we change that to, I don't quite know yet.
I've always maintained AFCON, CAF qualifying for a World Cup is the hardest. I've been in 2 or 3 arguments with South American journalists who maintain is actually South American travel because of the travel and the altitude and whatnot. But I still think that unseeded 2-legged tie is some of the most ridiculous things you've ever seen. If you watch any of those games, you'd be flabbergasted at how some of these teams have reached World Cups. And obviously this has been Infantino's pet project, in that the harder he makes qualifying for World Cups, the easier he makes his argument for a 48-team World Cup as well. So I'm always slightly uneasy in that, as this World Cup's always given evidence for, if you give African teams more of a chance to get to this World Cup, African teams can perform and can put on a spectacle.
Yeah, definitely. Flipping it over to Croatia, I was just sort of looking back at this, and Croatia have been eligible for 7 World Cups since their reformation as a FIFA accredited nation. They missed out on the 94 qualification because their UEFA accreditation came through a couple of months late. So from 98, there's been 7 World Cups. They've qualified for 6 of them. Mm-hmm. They've had 2 third-place finishes and a second-place finish. Their record at international tournaments is remarkable, and kind of this is my entire lifetime, really. So I'm kind of looking at it from this kind of point of view. Do Croatia now have to, I think it's 42% of World Cups since they become eligible, they finished in the top 3. Are they now a blue blood footballing nation? It seems mad. Every time we talk about them as, there's 4 million people in this little country next to the Adriatic, and the fact that they've brought through 3 separate generations of excellent players is kind of mad at this point. But they continue to perform. At what point do we go, Croatia aren't underdogs anymore? They are just a genuine top-tier footballing nation.
Top tier, top table, tier 1, world class. I don't know how you want to define it, as you said. So I'm not going to reveal my age too much, but I do remember France '98, and one of my I think their first ever World Cup game was against Jamaica.
Yeah.
And one of my uncles going, I don't know what Croatia is, but I'm thoroughly expecting Robbie Earl to put in a masterclass against them, and me very much in love with the design of the Croatian flag, but not knowing too much about Croatia. Go, no, I think Croatia can be good. They've got Davor Sucre, who I knew. And I was like, be quiet, you don't know anything. And they won that game 3-1. And I also remember my dad sort of being deeply confused at what Croatia were doing to Germany in the quarterfinals of '98 because they just won 3-0 and whatnot. And I think you're correct. I think now is the time for the massive athletic long read on how Croatia actually are one of the most successful World Cup nations of all time. I'm certainly looking forward to when, I don't know who's going to write it for the Athletic, but I'm sure it's going to come sort of what's in the water and how do they keep creating all these technically secure midfielders, because I need to know. This is remarkable. I think it's quite interesting. And not only are Croatia very good at World Cups, but they also seem to have a discernible style in a way that very few World Cup nations have, but is readily identifiable. So there's always the conversation of Dutch football and what is and isn't Dutch football. And I think not only have this Croatian team had so many good generations, but they all have that sort of Croatian style of football. And yeah, well done for them for also finishing a knockout game in 90 minutes today. That's nice.
I think one of those where nobody in the entire world wanted that to go to extra time. And when in the series had the header at the end, I was like, I think even he must have been like, I'm vaguely glad that hasn't gone in because no one wants 30 more minutes. Like literally nobody. So maybe the Moroccan fans in the stadium can have the exception to this rule, but I'm putting it out there that was the point. And actually, just to kind of finish that point, what I think is really interesting is Zlatko Dalic was talking about the fact that there's the handball culture within the country, the fact that there's a water polo culture. Team sport is pretty much the lifeblood. And, that you can do this in lots of different ways. And Pep always talks about rugby, and there are various things about differing sports and being able to transpose, if you will, a little bit of that style onto what's going on. And I do wonder if that plays a part in this, because that just kind of ability to, from the moment you can basically walk, you're thrown into team sport environments. They might not be the same as it was being on a football pitch, but just that ability to understand technical know-how and understand the fact that, possession is usually a safe place to be when you have a ball, whether it's in your hands, at your feet, or wherever. Yeah. I just think might feed a little bit into this Croatian psyche.
It might help. There's a fantastic video from Vox on why water polo is very, very hard. And there's a little bit in there that I've been thinking about a lot about how water polo very much stresses defensive transition. So the moment you lose possession, all those swimmers, boom, underwater, don't even pay attention to where the ball is in relation to you. Just get back as quickly as possible. And handball, so not only does Pep Guardiola talk about rugby a lot, but he also talks about handball. And he often talks about handball as a means of understanding how to break down a low block, because there are sustained periods of a handball game where it's just you and your team in a semicircle around the opposition going, how do we push and pull and move shape? So yes, I suppose that probably helps, not only in terms of being involved in a team sport, but the things you can learn from team sport and how, this Croatia team is always about pass and move, and also understanding that possession is a defensive tool as well as an attacking one as well. So yeah, definitely things you can cherry pick from all sorts of sport. And I just want to know, how do they make so many good number sixes?
I think it's a question that the entire world is asking. I was making this point at one point about goalkeepers, and goalkeepers from the Balkans just seem to be consistently wonderful. And someone made the handball point, and I was like, yeah, that does actually make quite a lot of sense, actually. So I'm going to leave it there. But actually, I think it's probably time for us to leave it there as well, Carl. And all I have to say is thank you so much for joining me on the Athletic Soccer Show today. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. I've been really, really enjoying the streams after the United States games as well. You've done excellent during this World Cup. You should be proud.
Thank you very much, mate. I really appreciate that. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. I've been Jack Collins. We'll be back, of course, tomorrow after the World Cup final between Argentina and France. We'll see you then.